Then it takes us into early to mid-January of 2009. So that was September 08. Now we move into January 09, plus or minus. And at this point, that Venus-Uranus opposition that exists in that chart. So we have Venus in the 7th house, Uranus in the 1st house. That's an opposition or a tension in that chart. It's about that relationship and a lot of changes in the relationship. So changes in client relationships, changes in relationships with the boss or with the other coworkers, and that kind of thing. So there's going to be a lot of changes anyway. This time period in January of 09 would have been an easier experience with those changes. So there was some sense of changes in clientele relations or changes in relations with coworkers or bosses in some way. And it would have been an easier thing to deal with at this point, being that it was an easy aspect to both Uranus and Venus from the moon. At the same time, the moon was crossing into the 3rd house. Again, remember, it was originally in the 2nd house in Aries. Now it's in Taurus, and now it's in the 3rd house. So it keeps moving, like we said. And so the moon, as of about late January 2009, entered into the 3rd house. The 3rd house is going to increase activity once again. So busyness increases quite a bit. So there could have been a change in the relationship between himself and his coworkers in some way that gave him more ability to have more things to do, perhaps, or it could have been a lot more interaction with clients that occurred right around January of 09, plus or minus. It could have been a sense of having to go out and meet more and more clients and do a lot more emails and a lot more information exchange and that kind of thing. So again, I'll have to check with him to see how this actually came about, but that would be what's suggested in that situation. Then there really isn't too much going on until about April of 2009, and that's when there's a square or a 90-degree angle, which is a tough angle, to Neptune, the planet of, again, illusion, idealism, and those kind of things. When there's a square to Neptune, this could have been a time of over-idealism or even self-doubt. You know, one or the other. They're kind of two sides of the same coin. You can be overly idealistic or overly pessimistic, okay? And so it could have gone either way. But the point is, in late April, plus or minus, in 2009, this would have been a time period of questioning himself, or perhaps seeing, having maybe a wider view than is maybe possible, being a little unrealistic. But whatever way that went for him, I'm not sure, but that would have been a time of maybe doubting the direction, or perhaps, again, like I said, seeing more than there can be. Then the moon did what's known as a void of course. And what that is, like we said, the moon was in Taurus, and it entered that in January of 09. It made some aspects to planets up through about, like we said, April. And then it was void of course. In other words, it didn't make any aspects from Taurus. It didn't make any aspects until it actually reached the next sign of Gemini. Okay? And so that whole time, it's kind of like sitting in limbo. So between the spring of 09, right up until last week, January 12th, 2010, today is January 18th, 2010, so right up until last week, there was a void of course moon from April until last week. And so that would have been a time of kind of like sitting in the background and wanting things to happen and just having to build and build and build, and can't really move forward with anything. As the moon has crossed over last week into Gemini, again, just like the moon when it crossed into the 3rd house, Gemini and the 3rd house are very similar to each other. Again, it's an amp up of activity, an amp up of discussion and moving about and interactions with individuals, etc. So a lot of activity increases with the moon in Gemini now. So that's going to last now for another about a year and a half or so or more. And so in this whole time that the moon is in Gemini, it will be making aspects as well. But the point is, things are amping up again, and there's a lot more activity. As far as aspects to planets, though, as far as that goes, the next aspect to any planet doesn't occur until the square to Saturn in early June of 2010. Okay, so plus or minus. And so this could be a bit of a difficult aspect, The intent here is that you're forming something useful, okay? And so back when the moon was in this positive angle to Saturn, back in June of 08, now in June of 2010, 2 years later, it's the same planetary interaction, but whereas before it was a smooth and easy formation, now it becomes more effort to form what wants to be done. So relative to what was created in June of 08, comes up for some kind of review or, kind of comes under the microscope for its usefulness in 2010. Or there might be a lot of adjustments made to make sure that whatever was created in 08 can work better for this individual starting in around June 2010. So late spring, early summer 2010 is going to be a time for readjustments of possibly what was created back in June of 2008. And then later in the summer, late August into the fall, that's when the moon is going to cross into the 4th house. Okay, so it's been in the 3rd house, now it crosses the 4th house. This is a time of forming foundations. So coming off the on the heels of that Saturn interaction, which is about formation as well, it really has this theme about from this summer through the fall is about forming the foundation, a true foundation of usefulness in this opportunity, in this endeavor, which in this case is a job in real estate. So there's some sense of forming a foundation happening this summer into the fall. Then as we get into next year, about a year from now, in January of 2011, this is when the moon will then square that Venus-Uranus opposition that we talked about before. So again, he's going to experience a lot of changes with relationships in this job. So relationships with coworkers, bosses, as well as clientele. And this will be another period of major changes with relationships. So January of 2011, there's going to be, and this is a little bit more difficult change than it was, say, in January of 2009, which we're going through, which we went through last year. January 2011, about 2 years later, so about a year from now, so about halfway between those, this is going to be changes that are a little bit, that need a little bit more adjustment, and a little bit more conscious awareness and conscious direction, rather than just going with the flow, in other words. And then finally, as we get to April 2011, plus or minus, this is when the moon will perfect an opposition to Jupiter. Okay, Jupiter being a planet that's up in the 10th house, that rules the 10th house in this case. It rules Sagittarius, which is on the 10th house of this chart, the second one down again. And that would indicate that this could be a real time of culmination with this career. Okay, so spring of 2011, assuming that in the summer of 2010 into the fall, that real foundations are created, and that in January, plus or minus, of 2011, that some much needed adjustments are made to relationships with clientele, etc. Then in the spring of 2011, there'll be an opportunity for some culmination as far as really getting himself out there, getting himself out into the outer world as this real estate agent, as this in this career. So again, it's a lot of building that's been going on, and it will continue. But the idea is to understand where we're at in different situations, and understand and have patience when there are some things that have to develop first before we can move into other realms. Okay, and so that, I mean, it's kind of in a nutshell what's going on there. But that wraps this up, this edition of On the Spot. So again, if you're interested in your own On the Spot, you can contact me through myastrochris.com. And you can, again, watch this. The best place to watch it would be on myastrochris.blogspot.com. You can find the particular On the Spot you're looking for, and you can have the charts to look at, and you can click on them and enlarge them to look at them more closely. But other than that, thanks again for listening, and hope to see you on the next On the Spot.